Okay, welcome to Issues and Debates in Psychology. This looks at some of the key theoretical perspectives and controversies in psychological study, and we'll start with gender bias in psychology. So, gender bias is basically referring to the unequal treatment or representation based on gender in psychological research and theory. So, the first term is androcentrism or androcentric, which is the tendency to view the male perspective as the norm, while treating female experiences as deviations. So a lot of research in psychology has been carried out using male participants and also carried out from male researchers as well. There's also a term of alpha bias and beta bias. So an alpha bias is where you maximize differences between men and women. And often that can reinforce stereotypes and potentially lead to discriminatory practices in research and application. And beta bias is where you minimize differences between males and females, potentially overlooking important gender-specific factors in behavior, cognition, and development. Cultural bias in psychology. So, cultural bias occurs when psychological theories and research methods reflect the values, assumptions, and perspectives of one culture, normally Western, while being applied universally. So the first term is ethnocentrism or ethnocentric bias. So this is the tendency to view your own cultural group as superior and judge other cultures by the standards and values of your own, which has led to Western psychological findings being then wrongly or inappropriately generalized to non-Western populations. Cultural relativism. This is a view that behavior should be understood in terms of the cultural context it occurs in. So this recognizes that psychological phenomena may manifest differently across cultures. It should be interpreted within their specific cultural framework. Cultural bias can significantly impact research validity, as finding from what's called weird samples, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, may not apply to other populations. So sometimes the research might be better to be from the indigenous population because they live in that culture and experience that culture. Free will and determinism. So this debate looks at how much free will have we got and how determined is our behavior. So one type is hard determinism, which views all behavior is determined by factors beyond our control. So according to this point of view, free will is an illusion. All actions are caused by prior events following natural laws. So this is on the hard deterministic side. Soft determinism is sort of in the middle. And this holds the view that determinism and free will are compatible. So while behavior is determined, individuals can make choices with constraints. Our actions are determined by internal factors like personal beliefs rather than external forces. So, for example, can you choose what you're going to eat? Have you got the free will to choose that, or are you biologically just programmed to eat certain foods, say? Have you got any self-determination to exercise? Or is that purely controlled by genes, say? And the other side of the argument is free will. So this is the idea that individuals can make conscious choices and they're not completely determined by external factors or genes or past experiences. So this point of view emphasizes personal responsibility and choice. So if you believe in free will, you can make your own choices. Now, that might be true to a certain degree, but you're also constrained by income, culture, where you live, what country you're in, etc. So there are constraints around free will. So, for example, I've got the free will to decide I want to go and fly to the moon, but without, £500,000 or whatever it costs, it's not going to happen. Types of determinism. So start with biological determinism, which is reductionist. So reductionism is reducing complex phenomena down to something simple. So if our behavior is determined by biology, that means it's determined by genes, neuroanatomy, biochemistry. So our actions are basically influenced by biological makeup. In terms of environmental determinism, this means that your behavior is determined by external factors and experiences. So, things we've learned, conditioning, cultural factors. In behaviorism, they have what's called tabula rasa. That means we're born blank slates and everything's learned. And the last type of determinism is psychic determinism, which is more of a Freudian psychodynamic perspective, which is basically all behaviors determined by unconscious mental processes, unconscious conflicts, repressed memories, childhood experiences. Freud argued that free will is an illusion. We have no free will. Everything's driven by the unconscious. The next debate is the nature versus nurture debate. So nature is obviously the perspective that looks at biological factors, genes, hormones, neurological structures, and all behavior is innate. So, for example, twin studies show a genetic influence on intelligence, personality traits with high heritability, and an evolutionary explanation for behavior. So things like fight, flight, freeze responses evolved to help us survive. Whereas nurture emphasizes the role of the environment, including parenting, how you're raised, education, culture, social experiences. So this view kind of suggests that psychological traits are acquired through learning and experience. So, for example, you've got cultural variations in behavior, effects of different parenting styles, social learning of gender roles. And to combine kind of the two, in a way, you've got the interactionist approach that looks at the interaction between nature and nurture, genetic predisposition, and how the environment may affect that gene, which is called epigenetics. So, for example, look at the diathesis stress model of, say, schizophrenia or anxiety or depression. The diathesis is the biology, the stress is the environment, and how the two interact. There's also conditions like phenylketonuria or PKU that is a genetic condition, but it can be impacted on by having a low protein diet, which helps it to limit the amount of things a brain developmental issue. Holism and reductionism. So holism is the idea from Gestalt psychology that says the whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts. And reductionism is reducing complex phenomena down to something simple. So we've got these six here. So holism is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So you've got the social level, group dynamics, cultural influences, the psychological level, your thoughts and feelings, neurological, brain structure and functions, biochemical, biological, neurotransmitters and hormones, and then genetic level, DNA, genes, heritability. So in terms of reductionism, so this is reducing complex things down to smaller parts. And you've got the biological reductionism, explains behavior in terms of physiological processes, brain mechanisms or genes. And then you've got the stimulus response, environmental reductionism, explaining behavior in terms of observable stimuli and responses, and as in the behaviorist approach. Holism emphasizes studying the whole person rather than reducing behavior down to a gene, say, because it understands that people are working and living in complex systems, and these can all interact together to affect behavior. the idiographic and nomothetic approaches. So the idiographic approach is more looking at how everyone is unique. So it uses more like case studies. So case studies like HM in memory, KF, Clive Warian, Phineas Gage. Then in psychodynamic cases like Little Hands, Ratman, Wolfman. These are all sort of looking at how people are unique. Now, the way they collect data is through case studies, unstructured interviews, personal accounts. And Freud studied Little Hands, and his father used to write letters, so it's all qualitative, sort of rich, detailed data. And the nomothetic approach is basically looking at how to establish general laws that can apply to everybody. So this is where you study large groups of people. It's mainly quantitative, uses statistics. And so, for example, in the cognitive approach, you could look at the multi-store model of memory, and that kind of applies to everybody. It's a nomothetic approach. You've got nomothetic approach from biological perspectives. So, everyone gets treated with the same antidepressants. And then obviously things like personality, Eysenck's personality theory, looking at universal traits, introvert, extrovert, etc., and putting people onto a certain kind of side of the personality dimensions. And finally, ethical implications in psychology. So if you're carrying out research in the UK, you'll be governed by the British Psychological Society, or BPS, which is mentioned here. In America, it's the American APA, American Psychological Association. Obviously, there are socially sensitive topics that would need ethical approval. If you're looking at things like stereotypes or prejudice, you might need ethical approval around that. Race, sexuality, mental health. And determinism and responsibility. So deterministic explanations may challenge notions of personal responsibility and free will, and that could have implications for how society approaches, say, criminal justice, mental health treatment, and personal accountability. Application of the research. So psychological knowledge can be applied in ways that benefit or harm individuals. Ethical considerations include how findings might be used, the techniques you're going to use to interview people, say, and what's the cost benefit? If the benefits outweigh the cost, might be justified. There's also other ethical implications. So, ethical ethics that you need to follow. So things like getting consent, briefing and debriefing, right to withdraw, confidentiality, protection from stress and psychological harm. So an ethic becomes an ethical issue if it's breached. So, for example, if you deceive the participants, you've breached an ethic, deception. So you'd have to make sure you debrief them. So if you want to find out more about the ethical guidelines, if you visit the BPS website, it should be all on there. So, thanks for watching the video, and see you on the next one.